Doing the introductions this morning. To lead off this morning's presentations, I am honored to introduce Dr. Robert Cherinka and Joseph Prezzama, both of the MITRE Corporation. Dr. Cherinka is the Senior Principal Senior Principal Information Systems Engineer for MITRE Corporation here in Tampa, Florida. His expertise is in software and process engineering with a focus towards XML-based web service and agile development technologies. Bob is currently Department Head for Agile Engineering and Interoperability, leading a distributed team of IT professionals located at 7 MITRE locations in developing and applying emerging technologies that enable information services and interoperability across several major U.S. government domains. Dr. Cherinka earned a PhD and MS in computer science from Old Dominion University, Norfolk, Virginia, leading research in static analysis and testing techniques for component-based systems. In addition, he earned a BS in computer science in 1987 from the University of Pittsburgh. After 6 years in the U.S. Air Force, he joined MITRE in 1993. Mr. Joseph Prezzama is the Associate Department Head for MITRE Tampa Operations, where he oversees project leaders in support of 2 unified commands, the United States Special Operations Command and the United States Central Command. Mr. Prezzama earned a Master of Science in Software Engineering from Monmouth University, Eatontown, New Jersey. Prior to that, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering at Trenton State College, Ewing, New Jersey. The title of today's presentation is Trending Approaches in Innovation Utilizing Interdisciplinary Methods. So I'd like you to welcome them.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Dr. Callis. My name is Joe Prezzama, and my colleague, Dr. Cherinka, will be co-presenting with me today. This morning, we will be discussing, like Dr. Gill said, trending approaches in innovating and utilizing interdisciplinary methods. Oops, I am sorry. This is the wrong presentation. This was our track session. Is this the right one, Bob? Okay. Before we get started, let me talk about the MITRE Corporation. MITRE is a federally funded research and development corporation. It is a private, independent, non-for-profit organization chartered to work in the public interest. MITRE runs 4 FFRDCs, one for the Department of Defense, one for the Department of Homeland Security, one for the IRS, and one for the FAA. We partner with the government applying systems engineering and advanced technology to address problems of critical national importance. We support a broad and diverse set of customers across the U.S. government and international customers as well. Let's begin by talking about the term interdisciplinary. Originally, the term interdisciplinary is applied within education and training disciplines to describe studies that use methods of insights of several established disciplines or traditional fields of study. It can also be described in terms of researchers, students, engineers, and teachers, with the goal of connecting and integrating several academic schools of thought, professions, or technologies in the pursuit of a common goal. For example, many of you may be aware of the term STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. This movement is an example of an interdisciplinary endeavor. As some of you may recall from our preliminary presentation last year, Dr. Cherinka and I discussed the benefits of fostering STEM initiatives in the local community. Today, STEM can be thought of as an example of the establishment embracing interdisciplinary concepts. There's an ongoing movement to integrate the arts and design disciplines within STEM, thus promoting what's now called STEAM across academia and industry. Innovation remains tightly coupled with science, technology, engineering, and math, the core disciplines within STEM. However, art and design are poised to contribute to the STEM innovation in the near future. The inclusion of art and design disciplines is a good example of the acceptance of interdisciplinary approaches in our society today. So we question, how do we go about securing the expertise of these interdisciplinary resources? Well, in the academic environment, you might walk down the hall to the next room, the next building, and speak to one of your colleagues. In the commercial world, this becomes more difficult. These professionals may not be present in your corporation on your project to provide you the expertise that you're looking for. You may need to pay for these services from the outside. It may not always make sense to hire these skill sets that you may need for the short-term project. So is there a way to tap into these resources in current fiscally constrained environment that we're all faced with? Well, one method of tapping into these resources is the crowd. Crowds are inherently interdisciplinary, and they often contain experts. These experts may offer great wisdom that can be leveraged to help us with our individual needs. The process of innovation benefits from a diversity of skills and perspectives that a crowd can offer. Crowds are readily available, and in many cases offer expertise at little or no cost. There are technology and communication trends that enable unprecedented access to information, people, even group sentiment, offering new ways to collaborate, connect producers to consumers, to investors, and ultimately to innovators. Best of all, you never know who you might find in a crowd. Now, crowds do present us with specific challenges as well. There's the peril of bias and groupthink that could be detrimental if not carefully exposed. We've all been in situations in a crowd where the crowd mentality takes hold, and it may not lead us to the most appropriate conclusion all the time. One example is that you can't trust everything that you find on the internet or Wikipedia. The crowd has the ability to influence content for the good or the bad, which is the reason why you can't always trust these things. It's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable as long as we're aware and vigilant. So let's look at some examples of how interdisciplinary resources have been used in the past. The Apollo program. It's been called the greatest technological achievement in human history. Landing men on the moon by the end of 1969 required the most sudden burst of technological creativity and the largest commitment of resources ever made by a nation in peacetime. At its peak, the Apollo program employed over 400,000 engineers, scientists, technicians from more than 20,000 companies and universities. The Apollo project was a mammoth engineering effort that basically applied Newtonian mechanics, chemistry, material science, and computer science to the task of getting a manned vehicle to the moon and back. This example shows the brute force approach to interdisciplinary resourcing used back in the 60s, before the advent of modern communication systems, the internet, social media, and similar technologies. And it epitomizes the basic definition of a large interdisciplinary endeavor. For a more modern example, the Boston bombing and the use of crowdsourcing. On that day, information about the blast spread more quickly on social media than traditional news outlets. This way of instantly spreading information far beyond the affected area also builds an online community of sorts around such events that can cross state and national borders. Advocates of social media and crowdsourcing have long touted its unrivaled power to gather huge amounts of information quickly and in crisis situations. With tens of thousands of people on hand around the marathon, most armed with smartphones, the sheer volume of data available for analysis proved too tempting to ignore by the authorities. So this example shows how the individuals and crowds in and around the Boston area used their respective talents and assets to add to the collective, which the authorities then leveraged for information otherwise not accessible. My final example is that my own company, MITRE, is a good case for a modern interdisciplinary organization. We employ over 6,000 staff holding degrees across the relevant core disciplines, including electrical engineering, computer science, mathematics, physics, other sciences, as well as degrees in management and business. As a corporation, we leverage these skill sets to solve our customers' most pressing problems. We utilize our extensive reach-back network to find the right resources for any given problem. And intrinsic to our nature is, with industry and government, is to help customers tap into these interdisciplinary resources. We've also pioneered the development of industry collaboration portals. One example up here is the Ahead in the Clouds, which is a cloud computing portal. This portal allows our customers to post questions anonymously and get answers back from the vendor community that are involved in cloud computing. And they can answer the questions, post their own responses, and ultimately connect those customers to those resources in the long run. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the world has changed. With the advent of the internet, social media, mobile computing devices, we have unprecedented access to information today. Less relevant are the costly brute force methods of resourcing used in the past. Organizations are forced to become innovative and remain competitive. Corporations, there are changes in business models forcing organizations to be more narrowly focused. There are many opportunities for innovation and success. There are also many technology and communication challenges ahead. So given these changes, what is the driving challenge of today? Well, we think one of the challenges is to find ways to better tap into methods of resourcing the various disciplines. How do you continue to maintain an edge on innovation while in a perpetually resource-constrained environment and while mitigating the perils of bias and groupthink that we talked about previously? Where could we go from here? Well, our goal should be the unprecedented access to information. Doing this through interdisciplinary resources and sources, people and group sentiment, new ways of collaboration, connections to producers, consumers, and investors, and taking advantage of modern technological advancements. So how can we get there? Well, one approach is by tapping into interdisciplinary themes, embracing culture change, taking advantage of enabling technologies, fostering business model change for new innovation, adapting to these new technologies, creating tipping points in public opinion and social attitudes, leveraging shifts in policy and regulation, acknowledging the emergence of new business models and the disruption resulting from unpredictable events. So at this point, I'd like to pass the torch on to Dr. Cherinka, who will dive a little deeper into these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone for being here and for the opportunity for both of us to present this information to you. So at this time, I'd like to, as Joe said, take a closer look at innovation and what this means for fostering new approaches to innovate further. And to do that, I'm going to look at three specific areas. One, I'll first talk a little bit about what we see are the emerging trends and technologies that are shaping new ways of sharing information. I'll highlight a few common approaches that you see used today, especially in large organizations across the government space and a lot of our customers, to innovate based off of the core principles of agile engineering. And then finally, the emergence of new approaches that we see that show great promise, approaches that are based off of tapping into social media, crowdsourcing, as well as gamification to foster what we would call continuous innovation. So with respect to emerging trends, I think the fundamental trend is the notion or a concept to understand is self-quantification. And what that really means is the ability for continuously tracking and altering one's daily activities based off of how you integrate technologies around you. And some of those technologies include, you start with sensors, right? Whether you're talking about wearable sensors that you may put on your body, to devices you carry as an individual, to devices that are all around the world today, continuously collecting information and sharing it. That information is shared into databases, massively online available databases. You've heard the term big data or clouds. This information is now being stored in ways that you can more easily access it and start to understand it. The mobile computing space allows anyone, anywhere, to have access to that information in new ways. Of course, you need a good way to visualize it and to see it and to understand that data and to make sense of it and to create value from it. And so there's heavy work going on in analytical engines on top of that data and visualization techniques for various platforms. And then finally, gamification, right? The use of game theory. We heard that discussed briefly yesterday in some of the plenary discussions. But that offers us brand new ways to collaborate with mass interdisciplinary sources of information and crowds, but also to look at alternatives very quickly and to help in decision making. Gartner calls this a nexus of forces and that coming together. And it's the coming together of these technologies that allow you to more quickly consumerize knowledge, people, products, services. So when you look at the cloud, you look at mobile computing, you look at big data, you look at unified communications, it's all of those combined together that help to offer the unprecedented access to information that Joe mentioned earlier. So what does this mean for innovation, right? At the very heart, what is innovation? Well, simply, in its purest definition, it's just a matter of taking some positive action to enhance or shape something in a positive manner. And it's important, there's been a lot of study in the literature that looks at innovation in various forms, to try to understand it better and how to do it better, perform it better. And I think fundamentally it's important to understand where it comes from and what some of the challenges are, and I think that's key. And as many of you are probably well aware of, innovation can come from many sources, right? It could come from, good, dedicated people just coming together to solve a challenging problem that's been presented to them. It also can come from just folks who are passionate or curious about some topic, and so they have a driving motive to go solve it or research it. It also could come from fiscal reality, right? You need money, or there's money being offered or reward, and so you're motivated to go try to innovate. But as we all know, it's not easy, right? There's many challenges to innovate. How do you take an idea that you might have and turn it into something of value that can be provided to many? And those challenges are often, right? You take an idea. First of all, just motivating a culture in an organization to freely, generate their ideas, share those ideas with others, which oftentimes create new ideas. But then once you have them, how do you socialize it? How do you gain support for it? And then how do you fund that? How do you obtain funding? And then how do you motivate and reach out to consumers or customers? So again, there's many challenges, But the real key for successful organizations is to understand what those challenges are and to put in place strategies to mitigate those as best as you can. Now, TID, which is one of the articles that we reference in our paper, talks about generations of innovation. And we thought this was interesting. And when you sit back and think about it, you know, there's a lot that you can learn from looking at these generations that have been evolving over time, right? You know, when we first started to think about innovation as an entity, you know, we had the obvious linear push and pull concepts, right? You know, you have a brilliant idea, you need a market for it, or you have a market, and how do you take your idea that's been starting to form and gel and put it to another market for the masses? You know, the light bulb is a good example. Edison had a great product, and he had to find a market for that, and he did. Or if you look at the early days of the automotive industry, when Ford, you know, took a good product, but he needed to figure out how to tweak it and make it available for the middle class and for the average user, or the average person. We then evolved into coupling, right? We figured out that, wait a minute, consumers should be driving this, and they should be providing a lot of feedback. And Apple is a great example of this. By collecting and interacting with the user, that feedback drives the future evolutions of their product design. You could take that to the next step when you talk about parallel, environments. So the Apple iPad grid is a great example in how Apple has formed relationships with its suppliers, and you need that entire supply chain in order to make a product that's usable and innovative. And then finally, we've grown into the network is commonplace for us. So we, as Joe mentioned, we have access to the ability to communicate with a diverse set of people and groups. And so through this notion of building predefined and pre-orchestrated systems, now you can work together to innovate as a team. So some common approaches that use and have evolved as a result of those models, that we see becoming very commonplace in especially our government customers, is based off of the notion of agile engineering. And there's some very key principles to agile engineering. One, of course, is to solve the problem by bringing together an innovative, diverse, interdisciplinary team. It's not just about a team of engineers or developers. You need all of the stakeholders that really could provide multiple perspectives on the problem. Bring them together quickly. And then the next part to this is, don't just eat the entire elephant, right? You take one bite at a time. And so you evolve through time-boxed sprints, and you're emerging, your requirements and your capability emerge over time through evolving prototypes to mature product over time. And that's very important, and that concept we're seeing used more extensively to streamline the acquisition processes in the DoD, for example. So there's some really good ways that we see this actually happening, and we're involved in many of them. One, there's a huge focus on user-driven development, user-driven acquisition right now. And so we see an extensive utilization of things like user-driven experimentation, where they take your products out to the field in an exercise, or they'll actually, in some cases, some of our sponsors take it to their operational use because they're willing to take that risk. And they will give you, the developer or the producer of that concept, really good, sound feedback. Back home, in a lighter weight fashion, there's an extensive use of what we call user workshops, where the user comes to you, to your facility, to your environment, and you create a simulated or stimulated, realistic enough experience just to get their brain around a concept. But they'll sit there and use your capability. They'll look at your mock-ups, they'll look at your product, and they will evaluate and give you their focus and their feedback. To multi-party engineering, which is actually now formalizing that, to working with you side by side through that agile engineering process that I talked about. Another example we see being used is the use of sandboxes, right? Where you're now providing test beds the user is sitting in those test beds. You're providing standards, you're providing tools, integration, mechanisms to basically facilitate third parties to innovate and try out and to market their products in new ways. And then finally, users are becoming more involved up front in the front design. So the use of storyboarding and what they call rock drill brainstorming is commonplace now with many of our customers. And all of you probably have seen or utilized even with your smartphone app stores, marketplaces. That's a very common term now, and it's a very good approach to spark innovation. On the commercial side, you're probably familiar with the Apple App Store or the Android App Store, right? But in our large government spaces, we now see DoD versions of app stores, both for desktop applications as well as mobile apps, or you see ozone widgets. They're adopting marketplaces all over the community. So users now can go and tailor their mission set, their application set by going to a marketplace and finding the apps. And then it's not just used for products. Marketplaces are being used as idea zones to capture ideas and to spark and to invest in, decide on how they're going to invest in new research projects. So those are the common approaches that we see today that have been building on the models that I talked about. But we think the real exciting future is just ahead of us, right? There's this emergence of really starting to embrace the social media, the crowds, and the use of games to really take innovating to the next level. So, in some sense, we're suggesting that you can even consider this a sixth generation, right, of the evolution. But instead of having predefined communities or organized, agreements, it's really more like the Wild West, right? You're tapping into the masses. You don't know the particular talent you have or need, but you're reaching out for the best available assets that you can. And the key there is mass collaboration, right? And to understand that, you need a community that comes together. You need a purpose that drives that community. And that community then decides to tap into new ways to collaborate. And that's very important. So common approaches we see there, from an industry standpoint, you've probably seen Topcoder. So this is what I would call crowdsourced pull. Today, you can go on Topcoder, and if you have a good idea or you have a project, but you need the talent, you can post your project and tap into the crowd and get the best innovators, whether you're a developer, you're a human factors person, a designer, an artist. They can provide, they can come to your challenge and provide their creative talent and their skills and help you get the solution, and you get to select the best solution based off of running competitions. It's a very effective technique. Conversely, if you are a designer, an artist, a developer, an engineer, it's a good way for you to become an expert and become recognized as an expert. Another one is Kickstarter. I call this the crowdsourced push. This is where you actually have the product or your idea, but you need investments. You need to tap into customers and to investors to fund that idea. So this is a really good source for doing that. And so I encourage you, if you haven't seen these two examples, to really look at that. We're starting to see organizations start to look at models like this and use them for their environments. A great example here is the local high school in Florida is using, for their seniors, they've asked their seniors to do, they've always continuously done a senior project for their engineering students. They're asking them now to look at Kickstarter, and the ones who become more successful are those who've gone through the marketing and gained a lot of backers, as an example. And from an industry perspective, Joe showed you an example of industry collaboration portals. These are very powerful because they allow you to match individuals who have a need with experts who they may not normally have access to. Very important to share information, solve problems together, etc. But then competitions and games are used to really advance the state of the art in research, as well as streamline acquisition. You know, DARPA Grand Challenge is a great example where they conducted a competition to advance the state of the art in robotics and autonomous artificial intelligence research. The JAEDO Robotics Challenge, it was actually an acquisition, right? They presented a problem. A lot of companies brought their wares, their robotic solutions to the game. They competed. The top 3 teams went on to the next phase of the acquisition, ultimately with one company getting the contract. We see that being used more and more frequently. So what are the keys to manage this? If you are an organization, how do you tap into this? Well, one, you need to understand how they work and how to effectively use it. Second is you need to think differently in terms of a business model. You need to understand how to manage a project like this. And then finally, how to appropriately scale it. And that's actually an advantage of crowdsourcing, because you can use this to scale it from something very simple to looking at efficiencies inside an organization, which is the micro task on the left, to actually generating new open innovation of solving grand challenges by reaching out to a larger crowd on the right. And they do this in this basically works through the process of atomization, which is scaling down a problem, and a complex problem, into smaller pieces, running competitions for each piece along the way, and picking the best of the breed. So in summary, we've kind of highlighted some of the barriers of innovation. We talked about some of the trends and technologies. We talked about how some of the common approaches that we see being used today based on analytical engineering are used. But more importantly, we started to show some examples of new techniques that we're seeing being brought into these environments for those organizations who are willing and able to adapt, as Joe mentioned. So I think it's very promising as long as you're willing to change your mindset and figure out how to tap into this. And of course, you do this by changing your culture and trying to look at new models for fostering innovation. So we feel that the approach is promising. We're seeing a lot of success so far, but we want to hear what you think. And later throughout the day, tonight, feel free or any time, contact us. Do you really think crowdsourcing, social media, the use of games can really be used at a large scale to foster innovation? Thank you.